I want to thank everybody for joining today on our webinar From Broken to Blessed. Today's webinar features two amazing panelists, Sara Schley and Dr. Jim Phelps. Sara Schley is the leader of Seed Systems, an international consulting collaborative that she founded in 1994 to create a regenerative, inclusive, and kinder world. Sara is also the author of the acclaimed memoir Brainstorm, From Broken to Blessed on the Bipolar Spectrum. She had kept her bipolar type 2 diagnosis hidden for decades until recently so she can save lives, end stigma, and optimize healing for millions. As for our other panelists, Dr. Phelps has focused his practice on complex mood disorders for over 20 years. In addition to full-time patient care, from which he is now mostly retired, he has published multiple articles on bipolar disorders and the collaborative care model. He currently serves as a research editor for the Psychopharmacology Institute, preparing monthly quick tape podcasts summarizing recent psychiatric articles. He is also founder of psycheducation.org, a website with detailed information on bipolar disorders for patients and families. With all that being said, I'd like to get this webinar started with Sara.
Thank you so much, Jake, for that kind and generous introduction. And thanks to IBPF for inviting me and to Dr. Phelps for joining us for this hour. So hi, everybody. It's afternoon here. I'm coming from Western Massachusetts. We're in the midst of a blizzard. I think about 11 inches and counting so far. As Jake mentioned, I'm the founder of a highly regarded sustainability consulting firm where I've worked with companies like Nike and Ford and Eileen Fisher for 3 decades. I'm a proud mother and grandmother, and I've been married for 26 years and counting to a stand-up guy. Right now he's outside in the sugar shack boiling up some maple sap for syrup. Sounds like a blessed life, right? And it truly is. But in this, I'm sharing only the glossy surface, and I'm here this afternoon to go deeper with you. As you all know, there's another side of the story. Before I go into my story, I want to note that this is my first time with IBPF, and I imagine folks on the line here have quite a high degree of awareness around bipolarity. So please forgive me in advance if you already know what I'm about to share, or if something in my story doesn't resonate with you because it conflicts with your own experience. This is just one person's journey, but my hope is that you will find some resonance with it and some healing in it. Like so many of us, I'm here to crush the stigma, save lives, maximize healing. So I hope that what I'm about to share helps. Breathe, right, Jake?
Right.
At age 21, I was a senior at a top university who seemed to have it all. I played varsity sports, I had a gang of smart, feisty friends, and with a 4.0, I was heading to one of the best medical schools in the country in the fall. Then, in what felt like just the flip of a switch, it was as if an alien had abducted with my brain. Suddenly, I couldn't add 2 + 3 when I'd aced calculus in the past. I couldn't get out of bed. I locked myself in my room, afraid to see my friends. I was too confused to navigate my way to class, even though I'd been there for close to 4 years. It was a tailspin into a living hell, and I was terrified. In the decades to come, I suffered from a debilitating brain disorder. Like Persephone in the underworld, I was caught in the grip of a brutal force, a prisoner of the darkness. As Jake mentioned, I kept this mostly secret for 40 years until now. I'm choosing to tell my story to do 3 things: save lives, end the stigma, maximize healing. It took me 25 years, 7 medications, excuse me, and 5 psychiatrists to finally get the diagnosis that saved my life. I have a bipolar 2 brain on the bipolar spectrum. I imagine that many of you on the line right now may have heard of the bipolar spectrum, but most people I ask are completely unaware that bipolarity exists on a spectrum. Even most healthcare professionals seem to be unaware of these brain patterns. Yet understanding the full spectrum and the distinction between bipolar 1, bipolar 2, and other forms of bipolar, as well as unipolar depression, and then acting on that knowledge can absolutely save lives. Here's how. Imagine you've been lethargic, unmotivated, unable to get out of bed, caught in a tailspin of negativity. You drag yourself to your doctor. The doctor listens to your symptoms, judges that you're clinically depressed, and prescribes you an antidepressant like Prozac. Indeed, it was kind of wild to find out that close to 79% of the over 71 million prescriptions for antidepressants written in this country last year were written by primary care physicians, most of whom have not been trained to recognize or treat the bipolar spectrum at all. But if you're like me, you're not clinically depressed. You are bipolar 2. And that poison can act like poison for your, that Prozac or other antidepressant can act like poison for your brain. And since the suicide risk for people with any kind of bipolar is twice as high as for those with major depression, getting that diagnosis right is literally a matter of life and death. In preparing for this talk, I wanted to get some accurate numbers regarding the prevalence of bipolar. I turned to our wonderful colleague, Dr. Holly Schwartz, who is professor of psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine and a global authority on the bipolar spectrum. She studied the data from hundreds of leading peer-reviewed sources. According to Dr. Schwartz, as well as the National Institute of Mental Health, here are some stats, and I believe they're all on the conservative side. 1 out of 4 people who appear to be depressed actually have some form of bipolar disorder. 1 out of 4, maybe higher. At least 7 million Americans per year have bipolar brains, and at least half of those are on the bipolar spectrum. My belief is that these numbers are significantly higher because of the stigma and due to misdiagnosis. And on average, it takes over 11 years to diagnose bipolar 2 or bipolar spectrum brains. And that's just way too long, because in the interim, the undiagnosed bipolar, who are ourselves, our family and friends, are among the addicted, the incarcerated, the homeless. Their careers destroyed, marriages ruined, and in the case of suicide, families left devastated with a gaping wound that may never fully heal. But we know it does not have to end this way. So why is there so much misdiagnosis? When you hear the word bipolar, what comes to your mind? Most people that I've asked will describe something like this: wild highs, all-night sprees, extreme mood swings, irresponsible behaviors. But they are actually articulating just one end of the bipolar spectrum, classic bipolar 1, often known as manic depression. However, we now know that bipolar exists on a spectrum. People with bipolar 2 brains like me do not show extreme mania. And because we do not act manic and do have many of the symptoms of classic depression, lethargy, despair, negative affect, we are consistently misdiagnosed with clinical depression and then prescribed the wrong medications. Why is this dangerous? Okay, we're going to hear a lot more from Dr. Phelps about this in a little bit, but I'll share with you that in an award-winning study, Dr. Phelps and his colleagues tracked hundreds of primary care patients with some psychiatric symptoms. They found that these people were given on average 8 with a high of up to 27 medications. 27! The point, while people with bipolar 2 are waiting on average more than a decade, 25 years in my case, for the right diagnosis, they may be given all kinds of drugs that are wrong for them, each with dangerous and even potentially lethal side effects. In my case, doctors convinced that I was clinically depressed gave me drugs that literally made my brain feel like it was shaking inside my skull. When I'd return to those doctors much worse, they'd think, oh, she's more depressed. Let's give her more of that drug. It's a brutal, vicious cycle. But as I mentioned, now we know bipolar 2 is not clinical depression. It is a form of bipolar, which can respond beautifully to bipolar-specific medications like lithium and others. We'll learn more from Dr. Phelps about that, I believe. But I can tell you they work for me. So getting this right, the right diagnosis and medication, is vital, because the wrong diagnosis and wrong medications can make broken brains even worse, while the right diagnosis and medication can save lives. I know, I'm proof. Okay, time for a drink, everybody. All right.
Why don't you tell them about the maple?
By the way, this is not, I'm going to guess you. If you guys could talk to me, I would ask, raise your hand if you think that's water. Everybody's going to say yes. This is actually maple sap straight out of the tree. It's the most amazing drink. Ice cold with a little hint of maple. Go up to the TV, pour it in your glass. Awesome. New England in March. All right. So again, many of you on the line today may be familiar with this, but I want to try to describe what I mean by a broken brain, because I think when most people who are not familiar with mood challenges like mine hear or see someone who looks depressed, they think about emotion. Oh, they're just sad. Let's fix their sadness. But that's not how it is for me and millions of others. When my bipolar switch flips, my brain simply stops working. It's a physical thing. Here are a few examples of the impact. There are many more. Simple, everyday conceptual tasks I've taken for granted become nearly impossible. One day, it literally takes me 3 full hours to unpack 2 bags of groceries. I get lost between putting away the tomatoes and shelving the cereal boxes. In constant confusion, I'm unable to sequence actions. I'm getting chills telling you this, even though I've said it so many times before. Whew. I forget multiplication. This makes me miserable. I had 800s on my math SATs. Shopping malls and supermarkets become impossible. There are too many choices. How long can I stand in an aisle trying to choose between peanut butters? The large or the small, the organic or the not organic, the cheap or the higher priced. These decisions paralyze me, and the inability to make decisions floods me with anxiety and shame. Getting dressed in the morning poses a similar challenge. What goes with what? How do I choose colors? If it's cold enough outside to need socks, like today, we have 10 inches of snow coming, and there are none in my drawer, I simply can't go out. I stopped doing laundry. It's too overwhelming to go through the sequencing it takes to fold, sort, and put away clothes. In the office, the bedroom, the kitchen, things pile up. It's not that I don't want to do dishes. I simply cannot do them. But I hate the mess. The chaos makes me crazy. And I am too embarrassed to invite anyone over into this scene, even though I'm desperate for company and terrified to be alone with my brain. In my case, these periods of darkness and incapacity are mercilessly unrelenting and last for 9 months or more. Minute after minute, hour after hour, day after day. I get no break, no relief. It's too excruciating to live, yet too scary to die. And given my inability to function, if it were not for my supportive family and friends, I know I could easily be on the street or worse. I share these descriptions not to depress you, but for this. If you are suffering with a broken brain, I want you to know that you're not alone. I want you to know that someone else understands what it's like to live day in and day out with a brain like ours. And there's help, there's hope. The doctor who finally diagnosed me correctly, 5th psychiatrist, was dedicated to understanding the complexity of bipolar. He used one of Dr. Jim Phelps's books, which includes a simple 11-question bipolar spectrum test. He asked, "Did your first incident occur before age 25? Well, yes. And do you have a family history of mood swings? Yes, both my mother and grandfather suffered terribly. My mom called it the cruelest disease. And when you were put on an antidepressant," he continued, "did it seem to work and then stop or make you worse?" Yes, absolutely. I got more irritable, more agitated, more of a trigger temper, which I never usually have. And with that and a few more incisive questions, it took Dr. Perlman all of 15 minutes to correctly diagnose what had eluded the medical world for a quarter century. I have a bipolar 2 brain on the bipolar spectrum. And that's bipolar without mania. The medications he prescribed as a result gave me my life back. I find it hard to fully express to you the magnitude of this transformation, from the devastation and suicidal dreams of a broken brain to the absolute miracle and awesome blessing of a brain that works, of the woman who's speaking with you right now. I don't know why this brain breakdown happens. Not even the experts seem to know. Maybe Jim will have an idea. As I wrote in my memoir, which I'm very proud of, I want to show you because I love the cover. brainstorm from broken to blessed on the bipolar spectrum. I wrote, the brain is as vast as the universe and equally uncharted. In years to come, I imagine we'll see how rudimentary our understanding was in the early 21st century. Meantime, we got a lot of work to do. And thank you, IBPF, for the work you're doing to help right now, Jake and colleagues.
Of course. Thank you, Sarah, for all the work you're doing to help. This story is amazing and inspiring to so many.
Thank you. But so we all want to help. I say to folks, if you've never experienced a broken brain, but know people are suffering, and chances are you do, according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, 1 in 5 people in this country are living with some kind of a mental health condition. That's over 62 million Americans. But if you've never experienced this, I want you to know that as frustrating as it may be, you cannot pull this person up by their bootstraps, cheer them on with your joie de vivre, or shame them into just do something already. These reactions are fully human and understandable. And by the way, I remember them when my mom was suffering and I hadn't experienced the brain like this yet. And I was like, just get out of bed, with some more superlatives that I can't mention here on this tape, right? Just get the F out of bed. But these reactions, even though they're fully human, understandable, they will not help. You can't shame somebody into fixing their brain. But here's what can help, and it's what I call your EMT, Emergency Mental Health Team Toolkit. Many of you may already be using these approaches, but I think they're worth mentioning here. And really, I came up with them after the book came out, and a few people sort of said to me, oh my God, I feel like dealing with headlights. I don't know how to help my sister, or, my brother-in-law had this, or they're basically fear around what to do. And so I say 4 things that you can do to help. 1 is reach in. Don't expect these people to reach out. They won't. You make the phone calls, you knock on their door. 2, listen without judgment. Don't try to fix it. You can't. Simply accompany this person with your love and presence. They feel isolated on an island of despair. You're showing up as a lifeline. Just do it is 3. Okay, this is for those of you who want to do something. Here's what you can do. You make the appointments, you drive them to the doctors, you pick up the kids, you put away the groceries, you fill the freezer, you choose the peanut butters. Simple tasks like these are Herculean for your friend. You do them. And finally, number 4, and it's key, create a posse, a support team for you. This is too much for any one person to handle, and you're going to need backup so you don't burn out. But here's the good news. The community of compassion and action you build as a result will be beautiful and serve you all. We're all going to need it someday in one form or another. Okay, so now my emergency health team friend, when you reach in instead of running away and show up with your love and kindness, you're going to be a huge shame eraser. The author Terry Cheney writes a quote that I love. She says, the disease feeds on shame, shame feeds on silence, and I will not be silent anymore. I would add that shame feeds on the stigma. There's still a massive stigma against mental illness in this country. People fearing the shame of the stigma don't seek the life-saving help that they need. I was just hearing a story about this yesterday, which I won't go into in the moment. But, if we feel too much shame, we're not going to ask for help. And so I posit that the stigma literally kills. You're showing up helps break this vicious cycle of shame, stigma, silence, and more shame. Your showing up can save a life. So if you have a friend or family member who's too ashamed to take medication, as I was for decades, I'm a, live in the woods, crunchy person. I didn't want to take any medication, but please let them know this is not their fault. If they had diabetes, they would take insulin. If they had heart disease, they might use blood thinners. If they had lung issues, trouble breathing, they could use an inhaler. Pancreas, heart, lungs, these are all physical organs, and so is the brain. Why do we treat diseases of the brain differently? It's time to stop that. My mentor, Juanita, who finally got me to accept medication, said, you don't deserve to suffer. You've done nothing wrong. This is genetic. This is physical. Just say yes to help. And because I loved her and respected her, and because by then I was pretty much hanging to life by a thread and I had 2 little kids who needed me, I listened. I wish it hadn't taken me so long. So here's what else that we can all do for those of us who want to do something. I call them practices for a healthy brain and use the acronym PECS, flex your PECS, to remember. It stands for physical, emotional, creative, and spiritual. Jake's smiling over there. And Jake mentioned that people might really like to know wellness practices like these, so maybe we'll get more into them after. And I know Jim has a lot to share on this as well. But I practice my PECS as preventive medicine with religious discipline because seriously, I know my life depends on it. And I've learned to have healthy respect for my bipolar brain. But I promise you, they're good medicine for anyone with a brain, because if I could see, raise your hand if you're not feeling any mental stress these days, right? The idea is to create balance and stability in your day and do one or more activity in each of the 4 areas: physical, emotional, creative, and spiritual, if you can. As the poet Audre Lorde writes, this is not self-indulgence, it is self-preservation. So here are just a few examples of the PECs that I practice, just to kind of, give you an idea, but they'll work best for you if you choose what you love. And again, we can talk more about this towards the end of an hour. So P stands for physical, and that's physical action is essential. We have to get moving, stretch, hike, bike, swim, get aerobic. Do a little stretching right now. Oh man, I'm not supposed to sit for an hour. So, we know the endorphins from aerobics in particular are good mood boosters. E stands for emotional connection. Human beings are social beings. Isolation, like we experienced during COVID, we know that's dangerous for our mental health. We're doing some research for this film, brainstorm the film, which we'll talk about more later. And we spoke to a bipolar researcher who said they can actually find inflammatory markers, which correlates with lower immune system in people who've been experiencing isolation. So loneliness is not good for you. So you got to get out there and connect with people in the real world, not just on screens. I say you can even be efficient, combine physical and emotional, and go for a walk with a buddy. And when I was first recovering, had to schedule these things, really important to make them in the book. So you got to, you show up with your neighbor next door and go for a walk. C's for creativity, acts of creativity, writing, singing, cooking, painting, dancing, whatever you like. For me, I'm a writer, love to write. All of these are brain restorative. And I also love to sing. I get a lot of healing juice from my community chorus that my neighbor encouraged me to join when I was grieving my mom's death. We're still singing. I think it's 8 years later. And finally, as a spiritual practice for a healthy brain, I'm a big believer in disconnecting from this kind of technology so we can reconnect with nature. We were not evolved to stare at screens, 18 hours a day. And studies show, not surprisingly, that going outside to someplace beautiful is calming for the nervous system and soothing for the brain. Then walk, stretch, listen to music, meditate, pray, whatever you do that helps connect you to something larger than yourself. These are all healthy spiritual PECS practices. So here's a little maple sap. I have to get outdoors every day. So I know that that's really helpful, important for me. Now, I'm uber disciplined with my PECS because of the risk to my health if I don't do them. But bonus, my friends and family tell me that this discipline is inspiring for them. One of my friends says, you're my North Star in self-care. Who knew? So this leads me to what I want to leave you with today. And I hope that you all feel, those of you who wrestle with brains like ours, bipolar pride. Maybe countercultural. Yeah, I'm saying bipolar pride. People like many of us who live with bipolar and other neurodiverse brain patterns have suffered in silence, fear, and isolation. We have internalized the vast social stigma that something is wrong with us, and we may be riddled with shame. I don't think that's okay. Do you? So let's tell a different story now, a healing story. These people are champions. We are survivors of internal terror who have risen like a phoenix from the ashes and emerged with some beautiful qualities of character and soul. Here are a few. We are emotionally fearless friends. There's nothing you can do, Jake or anybody out there, to scare me off that my brain hasn't already done to me. We will not leave you. We're also pretty much off the charts compassionate. I know there, but for the grace of God, I would be in the streets, and I know it. I'm not judging you. We are disciplined about brain and self-care and brain and other kinds of self-care, and we can help you with your pecs. And we are grateful beyond measure. And this gratitude can be contagious, because when you've been to hell and back, every healthy moment, every moment when your brain is working, that's a miracle. Let's celebrate the miracle. Thanks, everybody.
That was great, Sarah. And I just want to let everyone know I advise them to get their questions ready, as we will be doing a question and answer after Dr. Jim Phelps part of the presentation.
Can I just take a second to introduce Jim too? Jake, I know you have, but I feel like I have a total privilege of turning over to Dr. Jim Phelps, who's my hero and now friend. I mentioned this is the same Jim as the author of the Bipolar Diagnostic Spectrum Test that saved my life 16 years ago. In the interim, he was a huge champion of the book. I don't think I would have published it without his encouragement. He's now in our film team, core member of the film team, brainstorm the film as our consulting psychiatrist and science advisor. So I'm just so proud and grateful to know Jim, and always a pleasure. Always learn something every time he shares his wisdom. Take it away, Jim.
May I take it here, Jake?
Yeah, take it away, Jim.
Thank you. Well, following Sara Schley, I just sit here and listen to that presentation, and I am so awed by what she has accomplished and what she is willing to share and how she does it, that it really, it practically reduces me to silence, which many of my friends would point out is an astonishing. That just doesn't happen. So really, I'm thinking about our IBPF audience here. Like as Sara pointed out, most of you know most of what I might now say. So you can think of it as, this is how I'm going to give you tools and like ammunition for when you are talking with other people and you're trying to explain things. I hope maybe I can give you some further tools and some further ways of thinking about it and presenting it so that you can help other people understand this. Sara has done such a wonderful job of helping us understand the internal experience of this. I'm going to give you a little bit more of the physician's perspective on it. And I'd like to talk about 6 things, 3 about diagnosis and 3 about treatment. And the 3 things about diagnosis are, as Sara pointed out, it's a spectrum. There's the plain depression at one end, and there's bipolar disorders at the other end, and there are people all the way along in between. Secondly, the way this diagnosis is made does not rely entirely on the DSM, the official rule book of diagnoses. In fact, there are 4 other facets that are even more important. And thirdly, depression and mania, they sound like, well, like it's the manic depressive illness, like 2 opposite poles. Wrong. It's more like a graph, the manic axis and the depressive axis, and you can be anywhere in the space defined by that graph. Any combination of manic and depressive symptoms is possible. And so that's the third message. This territory, called a mixed state, is the most common experience of bipolar disorder, not these manic or depressed. Those are the 3 pieces about diagnosis. I'll go back over each of those in a moment. The 3 about treatment are, number 1, it's not all about medications. There are treatments that, as Sara has described, clearly improve the course of bipolar disorder that are not pills. Secondly, amongst the pills, we don't have to turn to the big guns, the things that frighten people, like full dose lithium and its potential complications, and atypical antipsychotics, which carry multiple risks, as I'm sure nearly everyone in this audience knows. We don't have to turn to those for most of the bipolar spectrum. We can use medications that carry lower risk and have fewer side effects. And then lastly, amongst my 6 is, how are you supposed to get hold of these treatments? How do you access these, or how do you help other people access these things? So those are the 6 domains I'm going to try to cover, just go back over each of them. First, the bipolar spectrum idea. There are people all the way along in between the 2 extremes. That used to be a radical idea. It's becoming really mainstream now. And I've been privileged to see that happen over my 20+ years as a mood disorder specialist. So it is now well accepted that there are people who have bipolar 1, who have bipolar 2, and have sub-threshold bipolarity that is not plain depression, but is not quite fully bipolar 2, like hypomania plus depression. There are people all the way along in between. And in fact, the majority of the people who have some degree of bipolarity are in the middle, not out here. These concepts of bipolar 1, bipolar 2 are just chopping up a continuum into pieces. It really is populated completely, fully all along the way, which means that when someone shows up with depression, because depression is the common ingredient all the way along here, when someone shows up with depression, the question is not, oh, do they have bipolar disorder? But rather, how bipolar are you? How much bipolarity is mixed in with your depression? That's the spectrum concept. Used to be radical. Now, I wouldn't say fully accepted, but amongst mood disorder specialists, definitely accepted. All right, second concept, there's more to the diagnosis than the DSM criteria. This is a sore point for me because well, how do you make a diagnosis? Well, you're supposed to use the rule book, and the rule book is the DSM, and the DSM, that's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. If you don't follow that, then you're not following the rules. Oh man, has that got us tied in knots? Because the research literature on bipolar disorders is very clear that there are 4 other dimensions to the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. So one is hypomanic symptoms as defined by the DSM. That would be like mania, a little mania, like more distractible, less sleep, more self-confident, talking a little faster, having ideas faster, being more active, having ideas about doing things that are a little less prudent than usual, shall we say. Okay, so those are the features of hypomania. Well, that's one of the 5 domains. Then there's, as Sara described, family history. Do you have anyone else in your family who's had a complex mood disorder? It doesn't have to have a bipolar label, although if it does, obviously that is even more strongly likely. Now, because all of these features here you see don't make the diagnosis, they just increase the probability that there's bipolarity mixed in with this depression. So hypomanic features, yes. Family history, yes. Age of onset, starting early, somewhere in the late teens to mid-teens to late teens to early 20s, early age of onset of depression. That's 3. Number 4 is course of illness, a wobbly course. It's not just one big down, it's multiple downs, and then some kind of not so down or something else mixed in, and then it's down again. Just as Sara described, it doesn't really stop for many people. It's just mixing itself between all these variations of super low energy and much more energized, but still feeling really terrible. So that's course of illness. It's bumpy. Also included there would be a postpartum depression, which is statistically associated with bipolarity. And then lastly, amongst the 5 is response to medications, particularly antidepressants, particularly having a high energy, bad experience on an antidepressant, not necessarily induction of hypomania or mania. All right, so that was my second of the 6, is there's more to the diagnosis than the DSM. These are all now very well accepted amongst mood specialists. And then thirdly, bipolarity is not about the 2 poles of mania and depression. It's about the graph. Where are you on this graph of manic symptoms and depressive symptoms? You can have both fully at the same time. That used to be the old definition of a mixed state, but you can be anywhere in this territory, really depressed and a little, getting have a few manic symptoms, lots of manic symptoms and feeling badly about it at the same time, anywhere in that territory. And that model, which was originally presented in 1994, is now also fully endorsed by the mood specialists who write treatment guidelines for the rest of us. So mixed states are really varied. There are so many variations in there, any combination. And lastly, about mixed states, the most common features of mania, it's not like people who are feeling really good at depressed at the same time. How would that work? No, it's agitation, irritability, anxiety, difficulty concentrating, and really disrupted sleep. Can't fall asleep, frequent waking. So anxiety, agitation, irritability, difficulty concentrating, and profound disturbances in sleep are the most common of these mixed features when people are depressed but have that over-energized manic stuff mixed in. Okay, that was the first three. Then diagnosis: spectrum, 5 features, mixed states. The last three will go a little quicker. First, it's not all about pills. There are non-pill approaches that are actually crucial, and for most people will improve the course of their bipolar disorder management. And the biggest one is regular pattern of sleep, a regular bedtime and a regular rise time, and relatively, but not absolute rigor around enforcing those timings. And I can see Sarah just nodding up and down. It's so important for most people, not everyone with bipolarity, but most people. This has in fact given rise to a whole field within bipolar disorder specialists called chronotherapy, the use of the clock to help manage the illness, chronotherapy. I could say a lot more about that. And Sara, if you'll have your amber lenses handy, if you've got those someplace, well, I've given mine away yet again. So if you can try to dig yours up, good. So if we say more about the management of light and darkness for this chronotherapy. And then even more quickly for my last two, the medications are not necessarily the big guns. The ones that for the middle of the mood spectrum are most, in my view, the most advantageous. And now you be careful because you're comparing this to your experience and there are so many variations out there. I'm not telling you which medications are the right ones for you. I'm telling you which ones are the right ones for me to consider starting with when people are in the middle of this spectrum. That's lamotrigine and low doses of lithium, not the full dose lithium where you have to worry about kidney and thyroid, low doses of lithium where most people can have 0 side effects. So it's just wonderful that we have at least 2 tools that have almost no side effects for most people. Many people have 0 and have relatively low risks, very close to 0 risk for many people. Not full dose lithium, not atypical antipsychotics with their risks, though many people need those, particularly people who are farther over toward the bipolar 1 end of this mood spectrum. And then lastly, how are you supposed to go about trying to help get this treatment or facilitate other people getting to it? Well, one of the things that we've been working on, we meaning my research group here in Corvallis, Oregon, is called collaborative care. It's about trying to help our primary care colleagues understand all this stuff, those six things in particular, understand them better so that they can become part of the team that provides these services without having to try to get to a psychiatrist. There aren't enough of them, and too few of them actually understand all this stuff either. So helping our primary care colleagues become part of the team is one part of this. And the other is exactly what you're doing here today. And thank you for being here. And thank you, Jake, for organizing the whole thing. And that is learning more, learning lots more. There is so much to understand to help become a good manager of your own illness. And the things that Sara has talked about, she went through many of them. And we're looking forward to your questions so we can talk about more of them. It's being a really well-educated consumer of sorts, a an expert through your own experience and your own self-education. So thank you for being here and letting me go on there a bit about all that.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Phelps. And with that, we're going to move on to the question and answer section of this webinar. And the first question that I have from an attendee is, can someone go through the spectrum over their lifetime? Meaning, can they be bipolar type 1 at some point in their life and then change over time?
I'll take a quick answer to that. In the view of most specialists, no, because bipolar 1, if you have it once, means you're a potential risk for having another manic episode for the rest of your life, technically. But there are things that make people have manic episodes at the beginning of their life that aren't present later in their life. So yes, I think it is possible that you might have manic episodes when you're young and then not have them when you're older, which technically moves you that way along the spectrum. And those things like marijuana, it's okay for some people and it does good things for some people, but it does really bad things to young people who have bipolar susceptibilities. Reproductive hormones, which most people are going to have, testosterone and estrogen, particularly testosterone. When you have less of it as an older person, that lowers your risk of having a manic episode. And alcohol and certainly other street drugs, which people tend to use less of when they're older.
Great. So the next question is, what indicates that you are in a hypomanic episode?
Sarah, what would be the leading indicator for you?
Well, no, I have the 4 A's that when we interviewed a guy called Dr. Roger McIntyre, and he talked about the 4 A's of hypomania. You mentioned them too already, Jim, but anxiety, anger, agitation, and attention issues. And so I think that you're the professional, so I don't know, but I think that where people make a mistake is they think, oh, that's just anxiety, anger, agitation, and attention issues. That can't be bipolar. But if you have depressive symptoms and then you have those things, it can be. That could be an indication of bipolar spectrum somewhere, right? Somewhere on your graph. And in my case, I didn't have those things until I was given an antidepressant. And when I was given an antidepressant, then my husband and friends were going, whoa, where's that trigger temper from? I was there because of my history. I had a dad with a big temper. I was like, I'm never going to be like that. So I was pretty even. But yeah, I think on your bipolar spectrum diagnostic scale test, I think that's one of the diagnostics. Did an antidepressant trigger hypomania? And that's how my guy figured it out. It's like, yeah, was one of the key indicators. So
just to give you an example, I have one fellow I talked to who said he has seasonal depressions and a family history of bipolar disorder. And in the fall, he starts to get depressed. And until he figured it out, it would happen every September. Well, every September now he goes, I'm starting to have difficulty figuring out what breakfast cereal I should eat. Oh, that's when I need to start taking my 300 milligrams of lithium. Perfect. No such symptoms all the way around the year, but he's got to watch for that indecision, thinking too much, just like Sara described. Which peanut butter, what drawer do the socks go in? So point is, it can be so subtle, and yet it's recurrent. There's a pattern to it if you observe closely.
They're both great answers. And then the next question is someone who has only had a manic episode brought on by SSRIs considered to be true bipolar type 1?
Sara, that's a rules question, so I'll take it, eh?
Yeah, you should, please. Yeah.
Technically, here are the rules. And you may be starting to gather that I am not very fond of rules. I like to think, not follow rules, but the rule is that if that manic set of symptoms that was precipitated by an antidepressant goes away when the antidepressant is stopped, then the answer is no. If it persists when the antidepressant is stopped, that now actually counts in the rule book. So the answer is yes. But really what matters is, does this mean, A, that you need treatment? If you're doing fine now, no. But if you're going to get treatment, it means ooh, you should be really careful about taking an antidepressant again. You should probably think about not necessarily going straight to lamotrigine and low-dose lithium, but you ought to think about it more seriously than if you'd never had that experience.
Great answer. Now, a question for you, Sara, is when you were first diagnosed correctly by your psychiatrist, was that first bipolar medication a fit for you, or was it an improvement until you got set on the correct one?
So caveat, I've learned that I'm lucky because the medications work for me. And Jim will probably tell you they don't work for everyone. But for me, lamotrigine, brand name Lamictal, was like pitch perfect. It took 3 months because you had to go 25 up, 25 up, 25. So it was very important to titrate up. And I was, cynical and pissed off the whole time because it's my 5th psychiatrist, and what did he know? I'm not any better. But God bless him. One of the things that he did is he had office hours every Monday through Thursday between 9 and 10 p.m. You could call this guy. Who does that, Jim?
Wow.
It was brilliant and beautiful because a person like me, then I'm anxious and I'm despairing and I'm, still suicidal and I don't trust anybody because I got my 5th psychiatrist. And he says, we know what you have, stay the course. And his compassion, his availability, and his degree of certainty, because he saw the check on that test, he was right. And in 3 months, it was like the flip back. It was uncanny, day and night. Now I know that's not true for everybody, but I could go. It's in the book. There's a story of this is in the book. I could go in more detail. But all of a sudden, I could see colors again. All of a sudden I could do the dishes again. All of a sudden I could laugh again. All of a sudden I could navigate. I'm a good navigator. I could navigate again. So it was very clear. Then about 8 years later, I had a series of issues. My mom's death and dying process quickly from cancer, sleep interruption that Jim talked about, which is really key. I had a shoulder injury and I couldn't sleep. So my sleep was all messed up. And there was a third one, perimenopause. Hello. So it turns out that those 3 things were enough to take me down. And I had a relapse, got Jim's second book. He talked about low dose lithium. We added that. Again, praise my doctor. He was open. I said, here's on page 42 where Jim says about low dose lithium. He was right before. I didn't know him as Jim, Dr. Phelps. Can we try that? And he said, yeah, it worked. So again, I can't be a prescriber and I'm lucky, but I'm the case that Dr. Phelps talks about where I don't have side effects and the medications. I'm knock wood, every day is a blessing because I don't know what's coming down the pike. But right now, it's the medications plus the behaviors, the PECS behaviors, plus your support network, plus. You got to do it all. And it's a lifelong commitment, but it works.
That's great. That truly is a blessing, Sara. And our next question is, just as there's uni depression, is uni hypomanic possible?
Yes. That doesn't occasion treatment, of course, right? You just get to live a life like that. Lucky you, that's great. Unless it turns into something dangerous, in which case it's getting a little bit toward manic, and that might warrant treatment. So if you're safe and your quality of life is good, amen, lucky you.
And the next question is, does schizoaffective disorder bipolar type fall on the bipolar spectrum?
So that spectrum from plain old depression to bipolar depressions, that's one spectrum. There's another spectrum from, where am I? From bipolar to schizophrenia. Similarly, people all the way along in between the two. No clear-cut division between the two. The middle gets called schizoaffective, but that's kind of an arbitrary, just sort of a name for the middle. And the crucial question is, could you manage this with mood stabilizers alone, or do you actually need an antipsychotic all the time? The latter would define the schizophrenic end, and being able to do well with just mood stabilizers alone, like lithium, defines the bipolar end of that continuum.
It's a great answer. So Sarah, you might be able to help answer this one. One question is relating to what's it like maintaining a relationship in a marriage with bipolar disorder?
I'm lucky to have the guy I have.
Hmm.
I'll tease him that he was on his third marriage, me. Now we've been together 30 years now, but by the time he got to third, he was like, the only way I'm out of here is 6 feet under, not leaving again. So he was and he's from the Midwest where they make good people. I'm from the East Coast. What I mean by that is solid, show up day after day. And he just, so when I'm in this is during my depressive phase, right? Because I'm bipolar 2, I don't show that massive mania. So that's a different thing, I think, for people with bipolar 1 partners to deal with. In my case, I'm just like brutally incapacitatingly suicidally depressed, and I can't do anything. So I had 2 little babies, twins. My guy had to show up and do it day in and day out. I think for him, he was, we get him on the call next time. He was extremely dedicated one day after the other. And when I got better, he crashed because he had been holding so much for so long. And what I mean by crash is he doesn't have a mental health diagnosis, but he just was really fried. So then we had to work in the marriage about how do we recalibrate now after that? And what do we need to energize to, what's the word I'm looking for? Nurture in our relationship to come back to a place of, goodness and equilibrium. We went to see a counselor for the first time as a partnership, went to marriage counsel. Wonderful, phenomenal person. And so that helped. So I think I think now he would say, like, he's a huge champion of what we're doing now. He believes in all that stuff that I talked about, the end bipolar pride. I think he feels, proud and lucky to be in a relationship with a person who's gone through this and coming out the other side and trying to help other people. But I would say that, for the person who is in a relationship with the person who's going through bipolar flare, they need support. They need a ton of support. They need the posse. They can't do it by themselves. So if you're like a partner right now listening, or a parent, or anybody else beloved, but in particular talking about marriage or partnership, I think that you really need to recognize that you're also what my counselor would say, patient number 2. You got to have a lot of support too, because it's going to be a 24/7 job here. So that's what I would say. I think you can still have a wonderful marriage. We're going on 30 years in a couple of weeks. And then we could get into the thing about kids. That's going to be another question, but I'll stop there.
Thanks, Sarah. Oh, Jim.
If I might just point out, you listen to Sara Schley. She is so wise and her understanding is so broad. You're seeing and hearing here why. When she sent me her book, and I have no financial stake in this, I just have a stake in furthering what the book is trying to do. When she sent me her book, printed out, like this, I read the entire thing standing in one place where I took it out of the mailer. It's so good because what you just heard, that kind of wisdom and understanding, and she's a very good writer as well. It is very gripping. I think anyone who is on this call can benefit in some way from reading that book.
Do you see why I love him? So there's a story there, but it's true. I want to get this book out more because people have been really celebrating it. So it's Brainstorm from Broken to Blessed on the Bipolar Spectrum. And you got to put my name in there too, Sara Schley, Brainstorm, because if you just put Brainstorm on Amazon, you'll get something else. But if you put Sara Schley, Brainstorm, or if you just go to my thing, sarahschley.com, then you'll find it.
They can also
amazing books too.
There's also brainstormthefilm.com, correct?
Yes. You can find everything there. You can find Jim's website, my website, the books, brainstormthefilm.com, because we're working on a full-length documentary that we have this incredible team of Emmy award-winning, PBS award-winning science documentarians, Bonnie Walsh, Melanie Wallace. We have other amazing people with lived experience on our team, Major General Greg Martin, former acting Surgeon General Devika Bhushan, Surgeon General of California. Incredible people with lived experience, and then these phenomenal doctors like Dr. Jim Phelps and Dr. Holly Swartz and others. So our aspiration is to create this coherent narrative that's never been out there before, that includes people with lived experience, plus the cutting edge science, plus breakthrough treatments all in one place.
That's great. That's really great. So our next question is this: individuals in the 70s and 80s were taking high doses of lithium and they received kidney problems. And they're wondering now if they could take a low dose of lithium and if that would still bother their kidneys, or if lower doses are fine.
Interesting thought. I certainly understand why the question is being asked. Of course, it would be up to you and your physicians to be very careful about this. You need a kidney to clear the lithium. Under extreme circumstances, some very brave physician might undertake to put a low dose of lithium in there and then measure your lithium levels to see where that had gone. It would be extremely unusual. Most physicians wouldn't touch it.
Thanks for that answer. And so our next question is from someone whose son was just diagnosed with bipolar 1, and they're looking for a resource or book that can help them navigate this process. So I will actually start off by answering this one. And I'm proud to say the International Bipolar Foundation has just released our 3rd edition of our Healthy Living with Bipolar Disorder book. And that book is for free. You can find it on our website under our resources tab. So that book has insights from nurse practitioners, psychologists, therapists, and has examples of lived experience as well. So there's 12 chapters in that, goes over a lot of subjects. I just want to get that out there. And now I'll let Sara and Jim say what books have helped them along with their journey, or what other recommendations they have.
I have 2 books by Dr. Jim Phelps that helped me. One is called Why Am I Still Depressed? And the other, I believe, is it called the Mood Spectrum Disorders, Jim?
A spectrum approach to mood disorders.
Spectrum approach to mood disorders. Those are both really great. Then his website is unbelievable wealth of resources of information, and I have no financial stake in that. It's called psycheducation.org, PSYCH education.org. And when I have been at my worst, it's been a real lifeline. He talked about amber glasses. They're not nearby here. I'd have to run to get them. That's for filtering out blue light at night. Talked about steady sleep, talked about quality darkness, a lot of very practical things on there that I think are super helpful.
And to answer that question, after you go to the IBPF book, which is amazing that that's available for free, what a gift. There is one more book for bipolar 1 called The Bipolar Disorder Survival Guide by David Miklowitz. And that's in its at least 2nd edition, a very good starting place for bipolar 1.
Okay, that's great. And then our next question is, someone wants to know, Sara, this is for you, if the book is available in Spanish.
Oh man, I wish it was. I had to publish this book by myself because no agent would take it because they didn't think it would sell enough. So I had to GoFundMe, one of the doctors, Dr. Schwartz, recommended, and it's a beautiful book. But the point being is I don't currently have any kind of a relationship with a foreign entity that would translate it for me. If somebody does, please be in touch with me, because it'd be great to have it in Spanish. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Sorry about that. I don't have it yet.
And then there's just one final question, that this one is a tough question. Is it possible to heal from bipolar disorder forever?
Nope. I'm going to answer it, and Jim, you can say yours. Not heal. You're not cured. There's no cure. It's with you forever, I believe. However, there's treatments that work perfectly. So you can live really well with this. And if a parent or somebody says, oh, my kid just got diagnosed with bipolar, I say, great, because now you have a diagnosis, now you know what to do, and you can live, you can live as if you're cured. You're not going to be cured. You got to stay with your practices. You got to stay with your medications. You stay with all the PECs. But I believe that you can live well with it.
My 2 cents, and thank you, Sara. Hope is a very powerful drug. And so if you have hope, it can do wonderful things, and yet dashed hopes can be terrible. So to believe that it's possible to be better is a very important ingredient in your treatment. And at the same time, you learn from experience that sometimes what you hope for doesn't come to pass. So I'll simply say, yeah, maintain hope, because there is almost no one for whom some better outcome isn't possible. And I wish that you get the outcome that you're looking for soon.
Great. So unfortunately, that concludes all the time we have for questions today. I just want to give one more big thank you to Sara and Dr. Jim Phelps. I want to let everyone know that this webinar will be uploaded to ibpf.org, and you will be able to watch it back. So with that being said, I'd like to see if Sara or Dr. Phelps have any more closing statements.
No, just thank you so much, Jake and IBPF, for all the work you're doing. Thanks for this opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Jim Phelps. You're amazing. And I just want to send blessings and love to everybody who's on this call. May you be well.
Right.
Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for joining.